Namaste and welcome to this late evening broadcast. And today we know that you are all quite concerned about what's happening in Europe, and therefore, to talk about his predictions about Europe that he did quite some time back, we have got Robert Spencer with us, and also Shri Vibhuti Jha. So let's ask about Robert Spencer. Let's ask Robert whether he is an astrologer. How come he knew all about Europe and how come he could predict all this that is just about happening? What do you say, Robert? You're an astrologer?
Yes. It was studying the tea leaves that led me to this. Actually, there is no surprise about what's happening in Europe. Anybody could have seen it. But what you need to know to have seen it are the history of jihad and the teachings of the Quran and Islam in general. And Europe has forgotten, even though it has a long history with jihad, has forgotten all about it and not learned its lessons and refuses to examine the teachings of Islam. And so now everything that could have been easily foreseen is coming true. And everything that indeed was easily foreseen is coming true.
I think Europe was probably one of the first continents to experience jihad after Africa, immediately after Africa. I think it was as early as 732 when they came into Spain, if I
7-Eleven,
remember right.
7-Eleven into Spain, and on the other side of Europe, they were besieging Constantinople in 675. And so the incursions into Europe were extraordinarily early. They are roughly at the same time that the jihadis, the siege of Constantinople, that is roughly at the same time that the jihadis were besieging Sind and entering into India. And so these are some of the earliest jihads that were undertaken once the Arabs began to come out of Arabia and conquer the surrounding territories. Of course, first they took the Middle East and North Africa, and then Persia, and then entered into India, and then came the siege of Constantinople. And then on the other side, crossing over from North Africa into Spain in the early 8th century. Europe was fighting against the jihadis from then until 1683. So that's 1,000 years
The
from
Battle of Vienna, 9/11.
1683, when the Ottoman siege of Vienna was broken. And you'd think that with 1,000 years of experience, they would know now what they're dealing with. Yet a collective delusion or a collective amnesia settled over the continent beginning in the 1970s. In the 1970s, there was the oil crisis that drove oil prices up quite high and frightened the Europeans to the extent that the European Commission entered into a series of agreements with the Arab League to guarantee low oil prices for Europe. And part of those agreements was that there would be large-scale immigration of Muslim Arabs into Europe, as well as other Muslims, and that there would be no assimilation. They would not be expected to adopt European values or mores. They would rather retain their own and be allowed to establish what became known as the no-go zones, the Sharia enclaves in Europe. This was a conscious decision on the part of the European authorities and explicit agreements that they entered into with the Arab League. You can read about this in the historian Batya Or's book, Eurabia, which has been dismissed as a conspiracy theory, but it's anything but a conspiracy theory because she has the proceedings of these various negotiations, the texts of the agreements, all the documentation quite clear that the Europeans agreed to accept mass Muslim migration. They agreed not to force the immigrants to assimilate. And now they're paying the price because now they have these large and growing groups of Muslims who believe that Islamic law is superior to the law of the land and that it must replace the law of the land. They could have known this even without these agreements with the Arab League because this is the history of Islam for 1400 years. But they forgot it all, they ignored it all, and they brought it on themselves. And now we're beginning to see the consequences.
If I may jump in here, I mean, you said that Sanjay ji said that you are a forecaster or a predictor. Knowing what we know, I think we can easily say what Sherlock Holmes would have told Watson. It's elementary, Dr. Watson. You are not seeing the writing on the wall, the tea leaves, and whatever else. But it's important to say, even in America, America is a big partner in NATO. They have all taken the vow to defend, attack one, attack on all. But death to America has been a chant for a long time. How come Europe has not seen that? And what happened to my computer?
Death to America is what they say every Friday in the mosques in Iran.
Right.
And
the point which I was trying to drive at is that even John Brennan, the CIA director, made a pitch that you talked about jihad is not nothing to do with violence. This kind of a brain dead scenario that is existing in the West.
Jihad-e-Akbar, you mean?
Come from? Where is that coming from? We know all the facts now. Sanjay ji and I, we have done Purva Paksh, understanding the nature of the beast, the enemy. It's evident. Yet everybody is bending backwards to integrate. France has set up a Forum of Islam, right, on the basis of yesterday, on Wednesday, and they are going to have a meeting tomorrow, Saturday, to discuss how to integrate them. How long will this foolishness continue? That's what I want to know.
The very Islam is exclusion, isn't it?
Yes, the Islamic groups have been very clever. They have known exactly what the vulnerabilities of the Europeans and the North Americans have been, and they have exploited them with extreme skill. And so they knew that the Americans, and to also tremendous degree the Europeans in a different way, were very, very worried about racism. The Americans have the history of slavery and the segregation and the oppression of the blacks. The Europeans have the history of National Socialism or Nazism and the genocide of the Jews and so on. So both groups are very upset about racism. The Islamic groups came into the West, the modern day Islamic groups, and they have cried racism whenever there has been anyone calling attention to the nature of jihad, the aggressive, expansionist, supremacist, and violent aspects of Islam. And so they have thoroughly fooled the Europeans and the Americans, because the Europeans and Americans apparently would rather die and rather have their civilizations destroyed and their countries conquered from within rather than be called racist. Because if they do anything to resist Sharia and Islamization, that's what happens. And so the people who've been calling attention to this all this time are called racist, bigoted, Islamophobic, hateful, and are silenced accordingly. With that kind of thing happening, very few people are willing to stand up at all. We just saw in the last few days Nigel Farage, who is not actually, he's just another one when it comes to the Islam issue. He ignores and denies the teachings of Islam and makes moral equivalence arguments with Christianity and so on. That's fine, but he also resists mass migration. And so then he's not acceptable. And so all his bank accounts have been canceled, and no bank will deal with him in the UK. And what they're trying to do, of course, is make it so difficult in the UK, and this is coming in the United States as well, for anyone to resist and oppose jihad violence or oppose mass migration in the case of Farage, because he won't say anything about jihad violence. But if you step out of line and you resist the standard story, then you lose your bank accounts, you'll lose your economic standing, you will be silenced, you will be marginalized, you will be demonized, called names, rendered toxic. People will be afraid to be associated with you. This has been done to me for years and many, many others. Not just the financial aspects. A few years back, Patreon canceled us. GoFundMe won't deal with us. MasterCard will not accept people donating to our organization. And of course, I'm on all the lists of hate groups and hate leaders and so on. And these things have real consequences because people don't want to associate with people who are toxic in that way. But that's actually the purpose of the list. It's not because you're actually doing anything wrong or being really hateful. It's just designed to frighten people into silence about these issues where no dissent is being brooked. Now, that's been done in regard to jihad, Islamization, and mass migration. So now Europe has it all and is paying the price. We're going to see Muslim majorities likely in France, Spain, Spain too, but France, Germany, the UK, Sweden, and elsewhere in Europe before the end of this century. And then probably Islamic republics and all manner of upheaval.
Do you have any prescription to roll it back?
Yeah, there's several things that can be done. In the first place, stop the migration immediately. Emmanuel Macron in France is vowing strong action against the rioters, and yet he's bringing more in all the time. Just the other day, it was announced that France would be bringing back 10 Islamic State jihadis from Syria, from a refugee camp. Oh, what? The rioters need reinforcements? Why is he bringing them back now? And this is not all, because there are many, many other Muslim migrants who are coming into France all the time now, every day. And Macron's not doing anything about them. And so he's saying he's going to act against the rioters, but he's filling their ranks all the time. So if he were really serious about stopping the riots and returning France to a peaceful state, then there would be no migration at all. And now people see that's inconceivable. If I say no migration into France, people will say, well, what? You're a racist. See, we've all internalized these things. You might even be wondering now. But let me ask you this. There are people in trouble all over the world. There are people in war zones, people who are suffering, people who are poor. I'm sorry that's the case, but that is the case. Now, why is it the responsibility of Europe to take care of these people? Why is nobody ever pressuring Saudi Arabia, which is quite wealthy, or China, which is quite wealthy, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is not wealthy but shares the ideology of the many of the people who are coming into Europe? Nobody's pressuring them to take any refugees. Nobody's pressuring any other wealthy region of the world to take refugees. Nobody's pressuring Russia, which has all the room in the world to take refugees. Only Europe and North America have this responsibility. And only Europe and North America are racist and bigoted if they refuse. Why is that? Obviously, this is a massive propaganda effort to intimidate Europeans and North Americans into thinking that they have to do this or they will be called these terrible names and suffer professional, if not personal harm. And so they have to put these people in, bring these people in and suffer the rising crime rates, the increased terrorism, the increased poverty, the lowering of the standard of living, all these things. And it's only their responsibility. So if France wanted to right the ship and end all this, it would have to stop that and change that attitude. But Macron is not going to do that because he ran against Marine Le Pen and Eric Zemmour on the basis of continuing all this when they were saying it had to be stopped. And he was saying they were racist and bigoted for wanting to stop it. So he won't do that. He won't deport the criminals. Do you know that the vast majority of the migrants who commit crimes in France, in the first place, the vast majority of people who commit crimes in France are the Muslim migrants. Now, that's no surprise because the Muslim migrants have contempt for the law of France, just like they have contempt for the law of India, they have contempt for the law of the United States, they have contempt for any law that is not based on the law of Allah. And they consider the law of Allah to be divine law, and every other law, excuse me, every other law to be man-made. And so if the one law is divine and the other law is man-made, why should they respect the man-made law? And they do not. And so they have no respect for the law. They come in and commit crimes. Also, of course, Islam permits the victimization of infidel women, as we see in the UK with the Pakistani rape gangs, as we see in India with the love jihad. It all comes from Islam's teaching about non-Muslim women, the captives of the right hand in the Quran. So if Macron wanted to deal with that, he would deport migrants who were convicted of crimes. And yet the vast majority of migrants who were convicted of crimes and who were ordered deported are not deported from France. They're just walking around in France anyway, even though they've been officially deported. This is a ridiculous situation, but it is a situation that makes for the chaos that we're seeing now. So, end the migration, deport the criminals, and you've already solved a tremendous amount of the problem. Not all of it, but you've made a good start. But those are two things he won't do.
How do you look at places like Poland and Hungary, who say zero immigrants, no Muslims at all?
You will see they're under tremendous pressure from the European Union, because the European Union is run by socialist internationalists who want to destroy nation states and create these massive conglomerations of super nations, supranational entities that will be ruled by them, will be under their authoritarian control. And they want to dilute the national character and the cultural heritage of the native people of Europe and elsewhere. And this is one of the reasons why they're putting this pressure on countries such as Hungary and Poland. And they tell Hungary and Poland, see, you're racist and bigoted because you won't accept these people. But Hungary and Poland are key examples of why it's wise not to do so, not to accept them, because Hungary and Poland do not have these massive riots. They don't have these rising crime rates and rising rape rates and all the rest of it that comes from the mass migration. And they don't have it because the people who do these things simply aren't there.
Right. just one minute. I recall this foreign minister of UAE, who is now the brother, then he was the son of the king, Abdullah bin Zayed bin Nahyan. And I think it's a very famous clip. I think everybody would have seen it. I'll just try and recall it, because in response to a question, he said that the rising number of terrorists and terror incidents will come from Europe because of three things he said: lack of decision making, political correctness, and because he said, I think those are very wise words, that Europe thinks that they know the Middle East and Islam better than us. And that's pure ignorance. Your comments on that?
Well, obviously, he's been proven right. The events in France and the events all over Europe, for that matter, indicate that the consequences of the willful ignorance regarding Islam that Europe and North America have chosen for the last 20 years since the 9/11 attacks, 22 years now, you have everyone who has said that Islam is not a religion of peace and that Islam has core doctrines of violence and conquest has been demonized, stigmatized, marginalized, and silenced, as I explained before. Everyone. And anyone who says these things is driven out of the mainstream and vilified as a conspiracy theorist and a right-winger and far right and so on. And this is a very effective strategy for silencing and discrediting people, but it doesn't mean that they're actually wrong. And the foreign minister has been proven right, and the so-called Islamophobes have been proven right. Everything that they have said has come true because it was based on the reality of Islamic doctrine. But European authorities, American authorities, Canadian authorities all decided 2 decades ago to ignore Islamic doctrine, to deny its contents, to set up as authorities on Islam people who were lying about the nature of Islam, such as John Esposito, Karen Armstrong, Reza Aslan, many, many others. I could go on and on. And they're paying the price because reality can't be denied. It's not as if the Islam that these people described, these apologists described, really existed. It never existed. And so now they're dealing with the real Islam.
Vibhuti ji?
Yeah, I mean, this is what bothers me. Some point in time, your brain stops functioning because what part of it we do not know. You know it. All of us know it. That 112.2 says that, I'm reading from there. Muslims hold that for someone to worship any other gods or deities other than Allah is a sin. Now we know that.
Of course.
We know
Ayat
that.
al-Kursi.
Yeah, I mean, how come we do not recognize that element that unless and until you change that, unless you make a fundamental change, that dropping the word kafir from their language, you can't have an agreement. That's what I always say, that every Indian voter must remember, if you are taking their help, you still remain a kafir. So my question again comes back here that on Wednesday again, France passed a bill called Justice for Reform Bill, and in which they have made phone tapping, video tapping, GPS tapping automatic. And obviously, the digital rights
and they were
advocacy,
condemning India for it.
yes, exactly. And the digital rights advocacy group says, again I quote,
At least, Vibhuti ji, sorry to interrupt. At least there is something that they can learn from India.
Absolutely, there's a lot to learn from India.
And they can learn even more from Yogi Adityanath's interview.
That's right. That's right. They made mockery of our complaint about terrorism until 9/11 happened. Sometimes you learn some tragic experience. So that bill, the French digital rights advocacy says, there is a serious concern over infringement of fundamental liberties. You are dying, people are killing you, and you are talking about your fundamental liberties. Tell me, what is it that we are not getting? Why?
Well, they don't want to get it.
Because
it's not, they're not stupid, they're evil. The authorities in Europe don't want to understand these things. They want to bring in the mass migration. They want to see these societies disrupted. Why do they want this? Because they're evil. They're not stupid. And what they want to do is see the government fall. They want France to fall. And they want to establish an authoritarian state in France and use the chaos as a pretext to establish an authoritarian state. And then they'll do the same thing in the UK, and they'll do the same thing in Germany and in Sweden, and then in the rest of the continent. And ultimately, they'll have their authoritarian state all over Europe. And they believe that by bringing in the mass migrants, the mass number, the huge number of migrants, they believe that they will have diluted the national character and the culture of the various states to such a degree that they will not have the will to resist, because the newcomers will be beholden to the authorities for the welfare payments and for the various other things that they're given. And so they'll be loyal, and the natives will not be in sufficient numbers anymore to resist. The only thing they're not counting on in this scenario is the teachings of Islam, because they're not religious, they're atheists, and they don't understand the religious impulse. And this is something that's true across the board of all religions, that people who are religious take their religion seriously. And that's the fundamental lesson that these secularists, socialist, internationalists do not understand. And so they think, well, Islam teaches that worshiping any other god but Allah is a sin. And so everybody's a sinner except the Muslims. And so everybody has to be punished except the Muslims. And everyone must be made to submit to the Muslims and to Islam. They don't believe that they really take that seriously, because they don't take any religion seriously themselves. And so they can't even understand the concept of taking a religion seriously. And so they think they can bring in all these Muslims who will disrupt and destroy European and American society and Indian society. And then they will be able to step in and take advantage of the chaos and offer the solution to the problem that they themselves created by imposing an authoritarian state. And then they think that the Muslims will be docile and accept their rule. And that's where they're wrong. And so that's where the whole thing will go wrong. But right now, they're just intent on destroying the existing order, and they're doing that very well.
Just another supplement to what Vibhuti ji had been asking. What about the people? What about the public? Why is it that the public doesn't come to the fore and resist it? Because I am speaking from the Indian experience. Because in India, they can't get away with this. The public resists. And the public resists so much that you can see that things have changed for a lot better since 2014. That is, I'm talking about the time Modi came into power. And the Modi also came into power on the expectations or on the disgruntlement of the people, or of the kind of appeasement that was happening. It's not that the changes were brought by Modi. People brought the change, and people brought Modi in. And after that, we have seen a sustained pushback to an extent where it is quite normal to openly talk about Islam, to openly criticize Islam, to openly deconstruct Islam in India. Nobody gives a shirt. And certainly you cannot be censored. Why can't that happen in Europe or in North America?
It did happen. Except that wasn't the end of the story. In Britain, it happened. There was Brexit. Brexit was, to a tremendous degree, a vote against mass migration. And yet, the people who were in favor of Brexit were not in power. the Brexit vote won, but Nigel Farage, who was the leader of the Brexit movement, he never had a chance, even close to a chance, to become prime minister. And the Conservative Party, which is part of the political establishment in Britain, promised to implement Brexit. And they were overwhelmingly elected in the last election, in large part because they promised to implement the Brexit provisions. But they betrayed the people who elected them repeatedly. And the Johnson government and the government of that lady, I forget her name, who succeeded Johnson for a few weeks, and then the Rishi Sunak government, they have all betrayed the people and repeatedly lied to them and said, we're going to do something about this mass migration, we're going to fix this problem, and then they did nothing. So the people did what they could. They voted for the people who they thought would fix this problem, but they didn't fix the problem because they were really betrayers who were on the other side. Same thing happened in the United States. In the United States, in 2016, the people elected Donald Trump because they were not happy with the way things were going. And then Donald Trump was framed for a crime he did not commit, of collusion with a hostile foreign power, with Russia. He was, it was his own FBI and the entrenched Democrats in his own government who were fighting against him and trying to portray him as having committed this crime. And that didn't work. And so they fabricated the January 6th insurrection, which wasn't really an insurrection. And they're determined to find some crime and put it on him and put him in prison. And I guarantee you, he'll be in prison probably before the next election. And so the people voted for him. They voted for the change for the people that they thought would bring the change that was needed. And the establishment was too powerful in the United States, just as it was in Britain. And so the change didn't come. And so the people have to keep working and not give up. But it's become more difficult because now in the United States, the FBI is weaponized. The FBI is a rogue agency. It's a dangerous entity that threatens the freedom of all Americans. And if you dissent from the official line too strongly, too vociferously, they will classify you as a domestic terrorist and crack down accordingly. And so many people are afraid. It's the same thing as I was talking about with Nigel Farage in Britain losing all his bank accounts. People don't want to have that happen to them. They're afraid. And that's just the idea, to terrorize the people into submission. And so, unfortunately, with the vast majority of people, it will work. But it only needs a few, really. The framers of the Declaration of Independence in the United States in 1776 were only 56 men. And they brought independence to the United States and defeated the greatest power on earth at the time. And of course, they didn't do it alone. There were others who were willing to stand with them. But it's the same thing. If people stand up in the United States, in Europe, in India, anywhere, then others will get the courage to stand with them. And so there will be a few who will stand up, and we can wish them all success. We are doing the same thing here, as a matter of fact, by even just having this conversation. And some people will see this and be encouraged and will be willing to stand. And that's what we need. It only takes a few to spark the whole thing.
Quite right. Vibhuti?
Yeah, I mean, this is what is it. What I'm seeing is a virtually a global phenomenon. Look at Hollywood. Hollywood pays homage on a very selective basis. The characterization.
Vibhuti, when you say Hollywood, please also compare how Bollywood has been brought down by the people.
Yes.
in
I
India?
was coming to that one by one, both of them. So the movie industry, let's talk about the movie industry in India and the United States. I mean, these are two countries that are of primary concern to us. What is happening in Europe is a symptom of a bigger problem, like, for example, population explosion. We know, I mean, the Pew Research has documented it, that the average population growth of Muslims would be 1.7%, non-Muslims would be 0.7%, and consequently, their population growth by certain year would be about 26.7%, whereas the rest, as against 24.3 today. So you're looking at a seismic shift that is happening in the global arena. You talk about population control, and they talk about individual freedom. So what is happening, what I see here, Robert, is that every tenet of our democratic way of life, we cherish, freedoms, they are hitting at each one of them one by one. As you rightly said earlier on, Islamophobia. You call it you stop migration, it is racism. You London mayor has openly talked about it, that UK needs more migrants. Guess who he's talking about? So the question here is very simple. Why? I mean, unless and until we find the answer why are we bending so much backwards, globe entirely? We won't find the solution to that. That's what my concern is. We are not addressing the why. We are cutting the branch and the tree and the leaves and the flowers. We are not looking at the root of it. How does one address that?
Well, if you want to go to the root of it, it goes back to World War II. No doubt it goes back before then, but World War II is a good marker to start with, because World War II was fought against Hitler, who was a nationalist. He believed that the Germans were the master race and that they had a natural right to enslave others and bend them to their will. And so it was because of his nationalism that the world fought against him. After World War II, the United Nations was founded. And the whole idea was to fight against nationalism, to destroy nationalism such that there would be no more wars like World War II. And nowadays, we still live in the post-World War II order, although it's breaking down now. But there are people who will say to you, see, it's worked. There has not been a world war. There's not been a World War III. We were able to stave it off because we gave up nationalism. Now, the problem is that these people, being internationalists, who believers in the idea that nationalism is the root of the problem, they have implemented policies in various nations that work against the best interests of the people of those nations. And so the people of those nations have quite rightly struck back and rebelled. That's what Brexit was. It was a nationalist response to the internationalist provisions of the European Union that hurt the people of the UK. Trump said he was America first. He would put the interests of America first. And people said that's terrible and racist. And he said, no, it's just common sense. Every leader of every country should put his nation first and work for the interests of his own people. But that was exactly what the leaders of the internationalist world order think is the problem, because they still think of the world in terms of stopping Hitler, stopping nationalism, which caused all the problems before. And they cannot distinguish. They have no intellectual mechanism for distinguishing between a positive nationalism and a negative one. If I, as an American, love America and think that the President of the United States should put America first, that doesn't mean that I believe that Americans are a master race or that Americans should enslave other peoples and bend them to our will. I just believe that the President of the United States should work for the interests of the people in this country. if you are an Indian and believe that the Prime Minister of India should work for the best interests of Indians, it doesn't mean that you hate everyone else or think that Indians are a master race and want to enslave them. But this is the way that the internationalist world order thinks about nationalism, that it's akin to Hitler's National Socialism and consequently has to be stamped out. And so they are still seeing the world in terms of the post-war world order, which, as I said, still prevails, although it's breaking down. And so they see Modi in India and Trump in the United States and the forces of Brexit in Britain as a terrible problem, as a recrudescence of Hitlerianism. And you can say, well, that's terribly unfair because Modi has nothing to do with anything about Hitler, and neither does Trump, and neither does the Brexit forces. Doesn't matter. These people, they can't, like I say, they can't distinguish or will not or won't distinguish between a positive nationalism and a negative. And so they have to destroy Modi and Trump and Brexit. And they have to do so in keeping with their internationalism. What this is about really is about whether nations, as they have always been on Earth, are going to continue, or whether there will be a new internationalist order that will establish a central government for the entire world, or at very least one for Europe and one for Asia and one for America. That's the plan. The European Union was a first step toward that. And then it suffered a tremendous blow when the UK left it. But the idea was to establish a European Union that would ultimately become not just an economic union, but a political union of one government for the Europeans. And then do the same thing in Asia. And there would be one government for India and China and Russia and Pakistan and all the rest of them. And that one, I know, but
that can never happen.
And then they
thanks for the partition.
Yeah, but that would unite then with the European government. And then in America, there were plans afoot there. I think there still are, to unite Mexico and Canada with the United States in a massive North American union. And then they would unite with the Europeans and so on. And so this was all in favor of destroying nationalism. And that's, you want to get to the root of it, that's what I think it is, that they want to destroy all nationalism because they are still rooted in the antiquated idea that nationalism is the problem. Now, Hitler was a nationalist, but this doesn't mean that all nationalism is Hitlerian or evil. But this is the distinction that they will not make.
Let me quote Benjamin Netanyahu. And this whole idea of nationalism being very bad and Israel being too nationalist was floated to him. He said that, well, Hitler thought that he was heading a master race. And here we have a people who think they have the master faith. So if master race is so bad, what about the master faith syndrome?
Exactly. This is the problem. But everybody agreed that this was what Hitler taught. It would have been absurd to say, well, Mein Kampf says that, but he doesn't really believe it. Although I suppose there were people who did do that. But nowadays, it's taken for granted that regardless of what the Quran says, regardless of what Islam teaches, Islam is peaceful and tolerant and benign, and anybody who thinks otherwise is the problem. And so nobody would admit, nobody even knows, or nobody even professes to know that Islam does teach that it's the master faith, and that the other religions have to be destroyed, that no religion will be accepted other than Islam on the Day of Judgment, as the Quran says, or that Muslims must fight against all people until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah, which is also in the Quran. Nobody knows these things. I bet if I were to walk out of my office now and stop on the street and ask the first 10 people I see, are you aware that Islam teaches that Muslims must fight against non-Muslims until the non-Muslims all submit to Islamic law, and that Islamic law establishes a superior position for the Muslims? That all 10 of them would say, no, it doesn't really teach that, or, oh, that's just the extremists, or Christianity is just as bad, or something of that kind. They would none of 10. And this is a large American city. You know, Los Angeles is one of the largest cities in the United States. None of them would say, oh, yes, that's exactly what it teaches. I guarantee it. We should do that sometime.
But, please tell me, just an aside, is it realistically possible to make a movie like 72 Hooray? You know Hoor? So there's a movie that is released today, 72 Hooray.
Is that
And
right?
before that, we had the Kerala Files and we had the Kashmir Files. There's so many movies and so many things happening here in India exposing Islam to the bone. Is it not possible in North America?
Not remotely. No, it's kind of interesting because back during World War II, here again, Hollywood was very strong in trying to rally the people to understand why the war was important, why it had to be fought, and to keep morale high and resolution strong. Even some of the most famous movies of cinematic history, such as Casablanca, were actually movies that had a very strong message about resisting the Nazis and fighting the war. Nowadays, that would be inconceivable. Nobody would make a movie about jihad, and there has not been one. It's been 22 years since the 9/11 attacks. Excuse me, and there's been no movie that speaks honestly about the nature and magnitude of jihad violence, and only a handful that have even come close to depicting jihadis accurately. Meanwhile, of course, Islamic lobbying groups in the United States whine about Islamophobia in the movies and make it even more remote that there would be any movie of this kind. I remember about 15 years ago now, a long time ago, I was I was speaking, and in the audience was actually a famous movie director. I won't embarrass him by naming him, but he was a famous Hollywood movie director. He came to see me speak. I was very honored, and I had a chance to speak with him for a few minutes, and I suggested that he make a movie of the life of Muhammad based on my biography of Muhammad, The Truth About Muhammad, because I said it would be a great movie. It's got all the elements of a great movie. It's got this very clever man who is fooling everyone around him and making them think he's a prophet, and he gets everything he wants, and it's got violence and sex and intrigue and everything that makes for popular movies. And nobody's done it. Nobody's made it, so you could do it. And he just he got very nervous and started to laugh and said that this would never happen. And of course, I understand why that is, because anybody who made such a movie not only would be inundated with death threats and have to go around with guards all the time, but also would be vilified as a racist and a bigot by the intelligentsia in the country. and would be portrayed as having done some terrible thing. Whereas if you make a movie criticizing any other religious figure, that's fine. That's courageous. That's innovative, but not Muhammad.
I think you should do a case study of what is happening in India right now, because they're making movies exposing Islam, and quite openly, actually, not so subtle either. And the entire Bollywood establishment, the leftist intellectuals, they are all opposing it tooth and nail. But the people are coming like an avalanche and supporting those movies and making them super successful. And not only that, all those hidden messages which would vilify nationalism or which would vilify Hinduism, all those movies are taking a tumble on the screen,
Yes.
on the turnstile. So I don't know. Somehow I am pretty optimistic about the way I see things in India, and I compare them what is happening in North America and Europe, which are supposed to be the bastions of free expression and free speech.
Well, maybe things will change in Hollywood. There has been a phenomenon over the last several years that some of the most aggressively propagandistic movies from the left promoting their deviant agenda have done very poorly. But the Hollywood producers don't seem to have gotten the message, and they just keep turning them out. But maybe eventually they will.
Okay, so let's move to the questions. Vibhuti,
Just
if
one
you
thing
have
I
something
wanted
to
to
say,
add.
then we move
Just
to the
one thing I've
questions.
seen from today's the standards of wokeness in America. Even TV series like Friends and Cheers will be considered unfit for the modern society. You know, that is a sad situation. And yes, I mean, for India, in India, the change has been dramatic in terms of awakening and asserting. These two things have begun to happen pretty well, and that it feels good. That truth must come out. I mean, you are not hating anybody, but why are we hesitating to even talk about it? You and I, why must we get branded as we are evil or phobic? We are not. We are asking questions in a true tradition of democracy for dialogue, debate, and discussion. I mean, if you want to criticize me, you are willing, you have freedom to do so, but don't take away my right to criticize you at the same time. So that's the only thing I want to say. Robert, you would be happy to know what Sanjay said just now. Yes, there is an awakening happening, and I'm seeing this here. You know, like even young people are seeing movies and they are talking about this movie telling the truth. There's something we didn't know, and people are now being sensitive about, running down our lifestyle or our way of life. People are resisting that, and very strongly at that too. Thank you. Let's go to the questions. Yes.
Okay, let's move to the questions now. And before that, I request everybody to please like this video, share it around, and also to subscribe the channel, press the bell icon, and also support us financially by clicking the link in the description. Questions, please.
And don't forget to support Jaipur Dialogue USA as well.
Yes, obviously. We are brothers in arms.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hey Ram, Pakis cry supporting Palestinians. Boat collapse proved. Pakis down with fish. Palestinians in upper level. When will Pakis realize their status?
I'm not sure I understand this.
Oh, they're talking about that boat collapse in Greece, where all the Pakistanis were stuffed in the lowermost deck, and they died first.
Well, Obama spoke about how terrible it was that didn't get more attention in the United States, and suggested that Americans were racist for not giving it the same kind of coverage that the submarine, the Titanic thing had gotten. So they actually have a very exalted status as far as he's concerned. And of course, he's a notable representative of the global elites who are pushing this socialist internationalist agenda. And so he wants to break down resistance to mass migration, and that's why he is trying to make Americans ashamed for not being sufficiently grieving in the face of this tragedy.
Right. Next.
Santosh Karkera. They don't know what violence the Europeans are capable of. Any new leadership emerging among the right wing to protect the Europeans from the attacks?
No, that was the grandfathers of the Europeans, not these Europeans. These Europeans, they have right-wing leaders, if you want to call them that. I know that it's kind of strange to call even Geert Wilders a right-winger because his agenda is completely on the left, except that he opposes Islam and mass migration. But that makes him far right as far as the international media is concerned. But you have Wilders. He's been in the Netherlands for many years. He's never going to be elected prime minister because the whole left is against him. You have the AfD in Germany. You have some small parties in Britain, Anne-Marie Waters and others. You have the Sweden Democrats who are part of the governing coalition now in Sweden. You have the Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister in Italy, although she's hamstrung by the rest of the people in her coalition. These people are not fearsome, violent types. They're not going to. They're just trying. They have a sinking ship that's got 100 holes and is taking on water by the second, and they have a ladle, and they're trying to dip it out one scoop at a time.
That's frightening. Okay, next. Next question.
Whoever's running this is what.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll read it out. This is Raja Reddy. He's saying, I have been following your phenomenal work when you had less than 10K subscribers. I can't commend you enough. I think that's for me, I think. Thank you very much. Next is
JBJP.
JP.
How do whites in North America and Europe view 500-year-long suffering of Hindus under Islamic rule from 1192 to 1707 AD? Do they understand our pain? I don't think they know anything about it.
If I went back out onto the Los Angeles street and asked the first 10 people, do you understand the pain of the Indians from the Islamic Jihad invaders and the occupation for all those years? They would say, what? That happened? They had no idea. Nobody knows this happened. No Americans know about this. One of the reasons why I wrote my book, The History of Jihad, several years ago, was to alert people in the US and the West in general to the jihad against India, which they have no idea about, and to try to awaken people to the fact that what India suffered and what so many others have suffered, they all are coming, it's all coming from the same ideology and the same belief system. But the vast 99% of the people in America have no idea of that.
I mean, you are totally right, because even today, I have to correct many Americans that I am the authentic Indian. The ones you called Indians are American natives. So we need to
that too.
Make it very clear to them,
Well, Columbus thought he was in India.
Okay, next question. Hey Ram, secularism ends where Islam starts. When do you think EU will learn this fact? They should learn from Yogi Ji, it's Yogi Adityanath, or fascist regimes will take birth in EU.
Fascist regimes will arise in the EU, but those are the people who are in power now. See, people don't know. People think, oh, fascists, that's like Geert Wilders and the Sweden Democrats. Those people aren't fascists. The fascists are Macron and Olaf Scholz and Sunak, because fascism is an authoritarian system that allows for the private ownership of the means of production. So in communism, the state seizes the means of production, and the state owns everything. And so when you go to work, wherever you work for the state. In fascism, the businesses retain their independence nominally, but they are all directed toward the good of the state. And so if Hitler said to the Krupp Corporation, do this, they would do it. So they were nominally privately owned, but they were the slaves of the government. That's what fascism is. It's bundles. That's what a fascists are, is bundles. That's what the word means. So fascism is bundleism. The idea is if you have one stick, you can break it. But if you have a bundle of sticks, they can't be broken. It's too strong altogether. And so you get all the corporations and all the people and every other interest in the society, and they all bundle together. And then you can't break them. That's fascism. And so what we have in Europe is fascism today, because the social media giants and the big corporations all work with the government. In the United States as well, the Biden regime is fascist because they were working with social media to silence dissenters. And there was just a court decision yesterday or the day before saying they couldn't do this because of the freedom of speech. And the Biden regime is appealing because they want to continue the social media giants to silence dissenters. But that's fascism, that the corporations and the government all work together. They're all bundled together and working for the same interests. So fascism has already come to Europe and the United States. What we're trying to do is get rid of it.
And you are absolutely right. Look at how Zuckerberg has come out. The bundler has come out with own threads to counter the dissenter Twitter. Think about it.
See, Zuckerberg is with the fascist regime, right, and Musk is not. Musk has to be crushed.
Abhinag is asking, Namaste, Robert Ji. I have a question about the Umayyad rule in Spain. They say that it was the citadel of art, culture, and tolerance. Is it true?
No, but it was a citadel of slavery. The Umayyads were the center of the slave trade for the entire caliphate. The Umayyad Spain was the center of the slave trade for the entire Umayyad caliphate. And the idea that they were a center of art, culture, and tolerance is a modern day myth that is based on the willful ignorance regarding the second-class status that the Jews and Christians suffered in Umayyad Spain, as well as Abbasid Spain. There was never any equality between the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. Never. This was forbidden by Islamic teaching. But all that's been obscured. This is discussed in the history of jihad as well, because these historical myths are specifically constructed for modern purposes. And so they have to be fought against for that reason. They're very damaging.
Europe also started doing something like, I just wanted to add to that, something like 1001 Islamic invention exhibitions. It was done in London. It was also brought in America. The question arises again, as a follow-up some of the time, is that why so much are we talking about in trying to educate the world? Next question, please.
Gajanan Vaze, thank you. Raghav Jha. All Abrahamic cults have similar commandments.
No,
like Islam.
Not really. Sorry. Look, I don't want to get diverted here, but the fact is that Islam is unique among the religions of the world in having a developed doctrine, theology, and legal system mandating warfare against unbelievers. There's no other religion in the world, Abrahamic or not, that has anything similar.
Okay, next.
Hey Ram, Indian Muslims mend their ways abroad, but in India they are radicals, including Pasmandas, while the land love jihad. How do you explain this phenomenon?
Well, I don't know that Indian Muslims mend their ways abroad. I mean, of course, Pakistani Muslims don't mend their ways abroad. They're famous for the rape gangs in Britain and so on. And Islam is Islam wherever it is. I can't think offhand of Indian Muslims who have committed jihad terror attacks elsewhere, but I don't think it could possibly be, the idea could possibly be sustained that they discard Islam when they leave India. No other Muslims do that.
Okay. Jay Templeton, nice to see Sanjay Dixit, Mr. Robert Spencer, and Vibhuti. Ja, thank you.
Thank you.
Rahul Kulkarni. I think all EU politicians run NGOs for refugees through which they earn lots of taxpayers' money, which is the root cause of mass migration. Is this true?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. This is a massive profit-making enterprise for the political elites. Everything we see is these days. I mean, you look at Ukraine. There are very serious allegations that the United States government sends billions to Ukraine. Ukraine sends it back to various Democrat politicians who voted for the money to be sent to Ukraine, and everybody's happy. They send some of it back, that is. And so the politicians who vote for this get a kickback, and that induces them to continue to support such policies.
JBJP. France riots by Arabs is lesson for our Indian YouTubers like Mr. Gaurav Arya, Major Gaurav Arya, who used to say that except for Pak, all Muslims are good, nice people. I think it's a statement. I'll leave it at that. It's nothing to do with us here.
I'll add to it. You know,
Okay,
our own RSS has this philosophy that says that Islam is good, some Muslims may be bad.
Some Muslims are good, but Islam is bad.
Next.
Jay Templeton, Sahil's YouTube is banned in Bharat. Don't worry, you can still access it. GPS Jadon, what stops governments worldwide, including us, to say it loudly that the M community and M religion, M literature, and M preachers are responsible for most of the terrorism and crime in this whole world?
If you say that, you're racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic. And the way it is. That's what prevents people from saying it.
Okay.
Abhinag again is back again. Thank you. Being an American, what's your views on the organization Nation of Islam? Why was Malcolm X assassinated after he left the organization?
The Nation of Islam is not a mainstream or orthodox Islamic group. It has very strange teachings, racist teachings that have nothing to do with real Islam. They teach that that there was an evil scientist, Dr. Yaqub, who developed white people on the island of Madagascar. And they're and thus unleashed evil in the world. And so I kid you not, really. But it's a shame that the nation is able to capitalize upon people's real grievances to gain members, because it is an absurd group and it's a hateful group that only tries to deepen and embitter race relations. And Malcolm X was assassinated. I don't know why. Maybe he had secrets on Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the group. Maybe they have something akin to the death penalty for apostasy. But in any case, he certainly was assassinated by members of the nation. And that's the best way to silence someone inconvenient.
Okay, next. Raghav Jha, apostate Imam, YouTube Hadith expert. Yeah, we know that. Next. Chahat Singh Chauhan. Hi, Robert. Can this cancer be treated politically or on streets? I can see France-like crisis imminent in Dearborn and other cities of Michigan.
Yes, it is. That is indeed something that we can take from what's happening in France. It will be in the United States sooner or later. And it could be prevented politically if our political leaders had the will to do so, but they do not. And so it will come to the United States, just as we have seen it elsewhere in the world. Because it's not as if the Americans are so in denial about this. They seem to think that Islam will be different here from how it's been everywhere else in the world for 1400 years. And yet the Quran and Muhammad and all the teachings of Islam are all the same. It's not as if they have a different Quran in America. And so these things will be happening here, yes.
Next.
Rahul Kulkarni, is this time for West Europeans to start migrating to East Europe? I guess that's the only way to save their life and freedom.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I don't know if Poland is disposed to take massive numbers of Frenchmen or Germans or Britons, but if I were there, I'd be thinking about it. It's actually a very good idea in general. It's just that I don't know. I'm an old man now. I don't know if I could learn Hungarian or Polish, but it's a good idea.
I suppose enough know English there.
Probably, yes.
Yes, they were willing to take up to 2 million Ukrainians, but not a single Muslim.
Well, that's only a matter of simple survival. That they want to take people who will respect their society and culture, and not people who will have contempt for it. Every nation should be the same way.
Right. Next. 72 हूरों का दलाल. I'll translate it for Robert. That's a pimp for 72 houris. The question is, with the advancement of AI, quantum communication, etc., do you see the real powers use Islam as a weapon to wipe out most of the humanity in time by design?
Well, I think that the left is using Islam as a weapon now, and it's designed to destroy non-Muslim nations, and as I discussed before, weaken the native culture, weaken the native heritage and the power of the native people. But then they think they'll be able to control Islam, and that's where I think they'll be wrong.
Next.
Raghav Jha, ridiculous commandment of Islam, IEAY at T78 by 33.
I don't know what that one is offhand. I know a lot of them in memory, but that one I don't know.
I think that describes the breasts of the Huris.
Oh, that may be. Yeah, I think you're right. I'm zeroing in on it now, looking it up, just out of respect for this individual. Let's see. Yes, large-breasted women of equal age. That's what it says. So that's what you get in paradise.
Yes. I can pat myself on the back. Yeah, I remember it. And know all about the Huris. Next. Hey Ram, on a lighter note, both Spencer and Dixit are coughing like Kejruddin. Oh my God.
Kejruddin.
I'm very sorry. Apologize. Also wondering about Robert's connection to Spencer Soda brand. My
Yes,
God.
I'm a Spencer Soda millionaire. Actually, I've never heard of Spencer Soda. So kindly send me a can and I'll let you know. But I'm not familiar with it. I'm not sure we have that in the United States. I've never seen it. Who is Kejudeen?
That's,
KG.
that's Arvind Kejriwal.
I don't know.
He is the chief minister of Delhi. He is known as a master dramatist and master con man.
Oh, and he feigns poor health.
Oh, yes. He keeps coughing all the time.
Well, I'm sorry for coughing today. It's I just have been flying a lot, and whenever it's bad for the breathing to be in those tin cans up in the middle.
I hope you have not been flying on camels and donkeys.
On Burak.
Burak, yes. Burak is more than a donkey, isn't it? Slightly
Yeah,
more.
got a human head, a winged white animal with a human head. I took him to the seventh heaven. The rates were very high, though. Really.
Next.
The vocal Bharatiya. Grateful to have you on today's Vartha, and I think it is referring to all three of us. So thank you very much. Grateful.
Yeah. Could take the next one as well.
Okay, Jay Templeton. Here in the chat, looks like Indian Muslims are being sympathizers of Muslims in France. Yeah, I was also reading the chat, but be that as it may, you don't expect them to change. Shaktiman.
Well, we are only hoping that if the French get beaten enough, maybe they will react. That we will welcome.
We'll see.
Shaktiman. What do you think about animated show South Park? They openly talk against Islam. Should we think about non-mainstream alternatives to gain traction?
Yeah, we are the non-mainstream alternatives. Here it is. South Park is all very well, but I believe it was Comedy Central. They censored South Park when they put Muhammad there.
Correct. They
They
did.
didn't have the courage to follow through and actually depict him. So it's moot, really. Hitler was not a nationalist. He was a socialist. He was a national socialist. Come on, he was both.
Next, Rahul Kulkarni. Hitler was not a nationalist. Not a nationalist. He was socialist. Well, Nazi means nationalist socialism, isn't it?
Yes.
Socialism created monsters like Hitler, terrorism, etc., but still they rule EU, US, media, and all global institutes. Cold War changed the battleground and West lost it badly. Thoughts?
Yeah, we all thought when the wall came down. I couldn't believe it that when the wall came down. It was unimaginable, and we all thought we had won. But it's very clear that we lost, and the communists won. The socialists certainly yes, and they are now consolidating their victory over the West. History is full of surprises, and they could still be stopped. They haven't completed their victory, but there's no doubt they did.
So when Francis Fukuyama said that it was the end of history, it was actually the beginning of history, isn't it?
Yes, sure. I couldn't believe that book. The book comes out the end of history, and he's saying that now there's no more political development. Now it's all over. What an incredibly naive and stupid thesis, and people took him seriously. I don't understand this world sometimes. But anyway, now he'll have to write the end of history part 2 because it keeps going.
Shaktiman. Will Europe and world be better off without EU and UN?
Yeah, that would be a wonderful thing. That would be akin to the wall coming down. If the EU and the UN were to disband, were to crumble, that would be a great day for the world, a time for tremendous celebrations.
I think the South-South dialogue will end UN if it happens.
You can see this happening in the WTO, the way this whole globalization thing has come crumbling down.
Correct.
And everybody is now seeking to have bilateral treaties instead of multilateral.
Correct.
Next. Ajeeb Admi. Ajeeb Admi means strange person. Had Europe not colonized regions of Asia and Africa, the whole would have gone to the Muslim invaders and force converted. European colonialists saved us. Are you
I
talking about India? No, that's not right. England, the British took India from the Marathas, not from the Muslims.
there you go.
Next.
I would credit that theory if the European colonizers had actually stood up to Islam, but I can't think of anywhere that they did.
Oh, in India, they collaborated. They collaborated with this
There you go.
because the Marathas, if you go deeper into Indian history, the Marathas has practically finished off the Mughal Empire, and it is the British who came and then they defeated the Marathas and kind of gave some kind of uh, last breath of fresh air into the dying Islam,
Mhm.
and then they partitioned the country. Yeah. Next.
Well, I think you skipped.
No, Kapil Bedarkar, we missed out that. How's left able to deform the history of crusade and give fresh face to Islam?
Yeah, this is important. It's taken for granted in the West today that the Crusades were evil. This is a new thing. Even just in the last few years, there were all sorts of schools that had the mascot Crusaders, and they changed it because they were suddenly ashamed of the Crusades, when even in the 1950s and 60s they weren't. The Crusades were a response to 450 years of Islamic jihad that overwhelmed the Middle East and North Africa and drove into Europe. And the Crusades were trying to stem that tide and win back just a little bit of that land. But nowadays in the West, they are uniformly portrayed as an imperialist colonialist project that was gratuitous violence against a peaceful people. This is not what happened. It's not true. But the left has done this, I think, in order to make the Westerners ashamed of defending their own lands.
Okay, next.
Mahindra Kanupuri. Hello, sir. Who are the main proponents of Muslim exceptionalism? Is it communist mindset or key countries in OIC? Though both want to achieve control, but their fundamental ideologies are different.
Yeah, but they're both authoritarians. They both want to destroy dissent and enforce their perfect societies by a reign of terror. And so they have no trouble working together. And it's not an either or, it's both.
Next. Bharat Telugu, your viewpoint regarding Obama minority statement.
Obama
In the context of India, that is.
Yes, I'm aware, but he's another communist, and he understands the corrosive effect of massive Islamic populations in a society, as we see in France right now. And so he wants to encourage that in India. He doesn't want to see Modi standing up and fighting back, and that's why he spoke out. He's trying to intimidate Modi into thinking that he will face the wrath of global public opinion if he acts too strongly against the jihadis.
Well, global public opinion doesn't matter in India one bit.
Yes. It mattered one time, but no more, absolutely not. And it must not, which is again important. Yes.
You should see the avalanche that came out against the Obama thing. I did a little talk on that, and it went viral. So you can see. Next.
This question is are Muslims awesome insan? Awesome insan.
One sec. I think we missed out one. We missed out one.
It was the same question related to that. Why does Barack Hussein Obama worry so much about Muslims? You answer that.
That's the same question.
He always had an affinity all through his presidency. And there was the famous picture where he was passing in front of the various leaders of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and he held up the one finger that is the Tawheed, the signal that's so frequently used by the ISIS jihadis to show the oneness of Allah. And so people wonder if he's a Muslim. I'm not saying that. I don't know what he really thinks, but he certainly has demonstrated throughout his career a tremendous affinity for them and for the global ummah in its congruence of objectives with the socialist internationalists, of which he is one of the foremost.
Next. Awesome insan. Are Muslim using France as a dhela on their tashrif? Okay. This is the practice of istinja, cleaning their bottom. That's what he's talking about.
Well, I don't know what to say about that, but in France, they are using what is happening in France to make a statement that they intend to carry through to the rest of Europe. That's certainly true.
Next. Akash Vashish, can't the world pressurize Saudi Arabia to change text in books like Quran and Hadith?
No. I mean, they can say pressure all they want, but the Saudis can't change Quran. If Muslims believe Allah wrote the Quran, Muhammad bin Salman is not Allah. He can't change the Quran. Nobody can change the Quran. We're stuck with it.
That's why probably he referred to hadiths as an element of change.
Well, even that, yeah, he can't even talk about changing Quran. He can talk about rejecting weak hadith, but even that, the problem is not weak hadith. The problems in Islamic society and law come from Quran and strong hadith, and he can't touch those, because if he touches those, he'll be an apostate and a heretic, and he'll be killed.
NP, the West doesn't have the ability to distinguish between Muslim and non-Muslim immigrants. They bracket Muslims and non-Muslims together. A Muslim in any for legal, illegal has predatory dispositions of conquering the kafir. Why is the West unable to understand this?
Because you'll be racist and bigoted if you understand it. That's all. It's wrong. We've been told for over 20 years now that it's wrong to speak about Islamic teaching, that Muslims don't believe these things. They're peaceful, tolerant, wonderful, and they're brown. So you're racist if you oppose them.
So at least we cannot be accused of racism in India. So that's why we are able to do it. Krishna Sundar, what is the main challenge we face in dealing with the ROP, religion of peace? And how does our weakness, fueled by political correctness, fear, and ignorance, hinder our ability to effectively counter their objectives? I think we've been talking it all day today.
Yeah, that's been the topic today, that the main challenge we face in dealing with Islam is speaking about it honestly, which most people fear to do, and which the political and media elites have made dangerous to do. And that's why so few people do it.
Gyani Admi, will this century be the end of Islam?
No.
What do you think of the ex-Muslim movement?
I'm all for it. I wish them all success, although I find it strange and inexplicable that some prominent ex-Muslims, such as Haris Sultan and Abdullah Samir and some others, I don't think they're real. I don't know if they are agents of some entity or if they're just not completely freed of their Islamic mindset, but they have both been very bitter in their attacks on me and on others for standing with India against jihadis. And Haris Sultan has said that Muslims in India are facing a genocide. And, this is ridiculous, but he insists that this is the case and that you have to hate Hindutva if you are going to stand against jihad, as if Hindu nationalists were some kind of equivalent danger to the world. as Islamic jihadis. And I think nobody in his right mind could really think that. And so it makes me wonder if he is pretending to be an ex-Muslim and trying to fool people so that he can bring about this anti-Hindu message and propagate it among ex-Muslims and others. That's the only way I can make sense of him, but I don't really know what's behind him. I don't think it's anything good, though. But otherwise, they're very courageous ex-Muslims, very important ex-Muslims who have done invaluable work, such as Ibn Warraq and Noni Darwish and others, and they deserve our wholehearted support.
Next.
Shaheen. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Shaheen Wahman Zadegan. Drod Abad Tho. I don't know what was that. Salutations to be upon you, Sanjay, Robert, and Vibhuti, sir. Islam was lucky when it conquered the severely weakened empires of Sasanian Persia and Byzantine Rome, and even adopted Persian art, architecture, etc.
Yeah, it was lucky. There's no doubt about that. That's actually true. Read the history of jihad. Sasanian Persia and Byzantine Rome were both severely weakened by a series of wars against each other. And so the Arabs were able to pour out of Arabia and defeat both easily because they were exhausted and they didn't have the military force to stand up against them. And so from one angle, it looks as if it's the most extraordinary military conquest in history, with a huge expanse of territory captured and held very quickly. But on the other side, it was really just filling a vacuum, because both of those great powers, and they were the two great powers of the day, didn't have any force to stand up.
Thank you, Shaheen.
Viv. Jinping is PhD in Islamic affairs. Should take class from China. Oh,
I do not advocate any of those measures. I do not support them. What the Chinese are doing.
Okay. Raghav Jha. Convey the history of Hazrat Bal to Robert, sir. Okay, some other time. Next. Sharvin Shelke. Why are they allowed to shed crocodile tears and act as victims?
Because it works. It's a very effective tactic. And nobody seems to be onto it. They do
They have mastered the art of victimhood. I mean, let me put it this way.
They're very good at it, and the non-Muslims fall for it every time.
Every time.
Last question for you, Vibhuti ji.
Kya baat hai? Kya baat hai means what's going on? You know, like how can radical Islam be reversed?
It's never been reversed except Spain, Israel, parts of India. Otherwise, what they have, they hold. And yet nowadays there is a challenge to it that we've never seen before in history, and that's because of the internet. And so a young Muslim in Saudi Arabia or Iran or even Afghanistan can go online and find challenges to Islam that were never available in those areas before. And so Islam is in a turmoil that it has never faced in history. And we have yet to see how that will play out, but there's every reason for hope.
There is every reason for hope. Brilliant statement. And I would say, law of physics, every action has equal and opposite reaction. Every trend has a counter trend. I think the counter trend is emerging. Very powerful.
Right. And may it become stronger. And with that, we come to the end of this marathon show. Thank you, all our audience. And thank you, Robert and Vibhuti Jha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. Great to meet you today again after a long time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.